Hello and welcome to News9. I'm joined today by Mr. Jayant Damodar Patil, key member of Larsen and Toubro, which is powering India's defense indigenization drive. Mr. Patil, welcome to News9.
Thank you, Sandeep. Always pleasure talking to you.
Mr. Patil, new government just taking over, it's ushered in a kind of defense reform that we've not seen in decades. What do you think the priorities of the new government will be when it comes to defense indigenization?
I think the first and fundamental, which we've seen in the various forms, the government has been moving towards that. And just put in a perspective, first couple of years we know that we had to anyway make up our own house, put it in order, because there are so many gaps between
Policy changes, restructuring.
Policy changes as well as the gaps in physical inventory.
Right.
And thereafter, of course, the reform really took off. And as a part of those reforms, 17 onwards, we see a big move. Till 2019-20, we still have seen the AONs approved by the previous government actually been cleared in terms of ordering. So last 2 years, we actually are seeing a scenario where the AONs of this government have started getting into orders and contracts. Now that 2016 policy, which essentially created a way that we now want to prioritize indigenous acquisition by IDDM becoming, and I always call it not number one, the zeroth category. By default, it is that. If that cannot be done, then the other category.
So zero setting, IDDM becomes a zero setting.
IDDM is the zeroth step.
Right.
Now, because of that, today one can actually say that on an average, if I take over last 3-4 years, whatever has been cleared by government, which will now get into the actual acquisition programs, is about 6.5 lakh crore.
In the next 5 years?
It is already something which is about to be sort of put into the acquisition channel. Many of those programs are already in the acquisition channel, and these contracts will happen within, I would say, next about 4 to 5 years.
And these are all in that 75% category that the defense capex is.
That's right. I'll come to that. Now, within this number that we really talked about, 6.5 lakh crore, what will necessarily now come from an Indian industry is typically 6.5. So our percentage indigenous content, which for 2024 was targeted to be 75%, will actually start going up and up and up. And if we take the 5.5 over 6.5 as a ratio, typically 85% will start happening indigenously. And the balance 15, to my mind, is a happy scenario that we still must have, allow the user to keep on getting something which is truly state of the art. And we know that when you're midst two enemies, you may have surprises, and you may want to have some quick acquisition to be done, and that's essentially where it is. Personally, as I see, the government will push far more into not just Indian basket, but that whatever goes in Indian basket will now have far larger indigenous content. Now, our indigenous content in our acquisition policy, good old days used to be 30, then it became 40, then it became 60. Like IDDM today, 50. Buy Indian where you don't own a design is 60. To my mind, these percentages gradually will start going up. And that's one thing which government will certainly do, because the more and more content is actually from designed and built in India, we will truly become, in that sense, strategically independent. And that would be a move. Second, very strategic move which government is making, not directly under defense, because we know that if we are going to be importing whole lot of our electronics, which is a weakness in Indian ecosystem today, we can make the equipment and systems, but the basic chip level we still are buying. Now, this is where the enormous amount of initiative of government to facilitate a chip building right in India, so that you are absolutely clear that the embedded knowledge that you are putting into any system now cannot be triggered and changed, or sort of denial of use can never be done by somebody else. If a chip was coming from somewhere else, you always had a possibility that somebody can switch off. So more and more of this indigenous push, more and more of incentivizing the industry if you want to do more. Typically, like let's say if a program says you must do 60% and if there is somebody who is offering 80%, sheer tax logic would mean that you should facilitate that company, or rather prefer that company over someone else who is doing 60%, because that additional 20 is going to get tax revenue to India.
Right.
At least to that extent, it should start getting incentivized. Yes. And I see very clearly that today there is mental makeup which will start moving towards how to facilitate,
right,
rather incentivize. We always say, it's not the salary which somebody really feels great about, it's that little extra annual reward which starts making people deliver far more. And that's exactly what happens in contracting. The bonus clause in a contract can do wonders,
right,
in terms of early deliveries, in terms of making higher indigenous content, because everyone knows that if I do that, I'll get that little extra. And that little extra is net profit, because there is no cost attached to it. And this is essentially where our belief is government will start doing that. Mega programs in pipeline. What didn't go into the acquisition AON kind of
in the last financial year.
Last financial year, we knew that last couple of months, everything had in a way slowed down. Not so much mandatorily needed in case of Ministry of Defence, which obviously had freedom to do things. But the leadership obviously was busy various other places, yes, and as a result, I see that a large number of programs will start getting released now. What is not in this 6.5, a big ticket item, let's say if I just have to take few, on the naval front, there's the destroyer which is not yet granted an AON, a frigate is not yet granted an AON.
The new generation destroyer.
Destroyer, new generation frigate. Also the sort of second avatar of what we call an LPD.
Right.
A new aircraft carrier.
Yes.
They are not today included in this 6.5 lakh crores of AON.
AONs.
And this is essentially where much larger values, right, essentially will start getting into the acquisition chain and primarily retargeted towards delivery from industry. On the land side, or for that matter the army side, we see lots of programs on the artillery,
yes,
because one has seen the kind of difference an artillery can make.
Yeah.
So more and more artillery acquisition programs I see happening.
Is this a fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war, where the role of artillery?
To some extent, yes.
Was very
fallout
key.
Of the Ukraine-Russia war. That second aspect also associated is you don't have to get hand-to-hand or face-to-face kind of an engagement with artillery. You can do it from much more,
right,
longer distance. And although autonomous wars, which essentially one is talking with drones and other things,
yeah,
will have a surprise effect, disproportionate in that sense, in terms of what goes in behind in terms of cost, or for that matter the requirement of people, but the effect that it produces in terms of surprise. It's more of a guerrilla kind of a war, right, scenario.
Right.
While in a structured kind of a war, this is what is going to make a big difference. So we know there's attacks in pipeline, which is about to be ordered. There's 400 towed guns, once again getting back into an AON, which is about to be issued. There's mounted guns which, right, are in pipeline. There's FICV, which government has released. Light tank is almost already ready. The full-fledged MBT is not yet reached the AON approval.
This is the T90 replacement, T72.
In a way T90 replacement. But T90, when we took them, we didn't really at that day, yeah, have clarity about the high altitude war.
Right.
So today, let's say for that matter, once these specifications were being written, what happened to light tank specifications, multiple times revision, what has happened thereafter to the FICV will also happen to the FRCV.
Right.
Now FRCVs, or for that matter any of these tanks, one will expect them truly to be, agnostic
deployed
of in any of the
altitude and
terrain you want
terrain.
to put it
Absolutely.
on, and I think that is going to make a huge amount of difference, and that's not available anywhere else.
Right.
So you can't take a next version of T90 and produce it in India and assume
Right.
that it will work there.
Right.
We know in the absolute peak of summer, they have issues in desert. Also at the other end, in high altitude, they have limitations. Now all these, to my mind, will start creating huge amount of difference. And of course on the air side, there will be Mark 1 which is about to happen now, that order. Mark 2 will come in. AMCA will begin now. The program is already approved. So I see next 5-10 years, there's enormous focus which will start moving in. And in a way, Raksha Mantri already made a statement about this current scenario of 1.1 lakh crore, which is happening from the indigenous defense industry, plus the exports of 20,000. From 1.3, it will reach 3, exactly in 5 years' time. So from 1.3 lakh crore to 3 lakh crore is a huge growth rate, and that's what will be a reality just about 3 years, 5 years time frame.
What can you tell us about the Zorawar light tank project? L&T is a key partner in developing this capability, which is in record time you've developed it after the 2020 incidents
Absolutely.
in Ladakh.
In fact, Zora World One was not even thinking till 2020. I mean, Army obviously had some early thinking, but we had, since Vajras were taken to high altitude, since we delivered them fast, they went there, and we had first-hand experience of what is high altitude environment and how to deal with it. Now, this is a time we decided to make a suo motu kind of a proposal, saying that we can take that chassis and create a lighter tank. Then we realized the moment the high altitude became very, very sort of prominent requirement because of 2020 scenario, and Army said they would like to have a tank fully capable, futuristically sort of aligned in terms of technologies, but at the same time below 25 tons, which can float. Now, given this combination of requirements, which obviously are publicly available as a part of MOD's release at that point in time, or the Army's release as requirements, we started thinking of creating a completely new hull form and building a tank on it. What I can say today is, I think some of these approaches of doing it ab initio sometimes can be truly, I would say, futuristic, and one can be proud that nowhere in the world anybody developed a tank in 18 months.
18 months is all it took you to develop
And from the day
from scratch.
The day we received our developmental contract, because we knew one thing, if I go into it and put entirely my own money, there are two risks. First risk is, if I develop it, so what? Is a question which anybody will ask. Second, I burn in and put in all my money, and I can't look forward to an acquisition because nobody will listen to me at that point in time. So what we decided to do is to, DRDO obviously had similar kind of thoughts once these requirements started coming in. So we aligned together and we started doing the development together. I must tell you, some of these are those knowledge partnerships with a certain level of maturity, which L&T has gained entirely out of that 4 decades of relationship with DRDO. And DRDO has enormous knowledge, I would say, repository in the form of when they developed MBT Arjun. Directly what happens on a tank or a product is one aspect, but the experiences that people gained now started becoming very handy at the time of the development of the light tank.
Right.
Now that and the agility of what one can do in a private sector came together, and we made a tank happen in 18 months.
Plus you had your experience of assembling the K9 Vajra. And
absolutely. The same factory produced it.
Yes.
And that factory, in fact, when Vajras were getting produced, we seen about 92% robotization in Vajra.
Right.
So Vajra hull turret were truly, everything getting produced Industry 4.0. And that cuts down your entire cycle times. It requires a better design maturity in terms of when you're doing the first design. But if your design is clear, production, is very fast. And that's what happened. We obviously had our own share of the Germans not delivering the engine and got it substantially delayed. This 18 months could have been as low as 14 months. And then we decided mid-course, we'll buy another engine. We'll not buy the German engine. Germans delivered the engine 7 months later. Now we had the tank running by then with alternate
So your
engines.
prototype does not run on a German engine?
The prototype today doesn't run on a German engine because they delivered it far too late.
Right.
The tank was already running on the test tracks when they delivered.
You're also key contender, your consortium with Navantia is also a key contender for the 75 India program. It's been a long delayed program. It's been in the pipeline for almost 2 decades. Where are we with the 75I?
75 India is, I must say, on a right track. And as I see the scenario, within this calendar year, all the trials, because the trials are scheduled in the first half, including the post-trial evaluation and what we call in MOD as the GS evaluation, will all be over, and we probably will look forward to the bid opening somewhere around end of this year, if not calendar year, by the financial year end. So the program is moving, and it's in good, I would say, position today.
Right. And when do you envisage the delivery of the first of this class, if everything goes as per schedule?
We know that bid opening and contract signing can be a substantial time gap, and that's a matter which today to some extent remains bit open.
Right.
Now, original expectations on the program was 10 to 12 years. We probably should be able to do that because should Larsen Toubro win it, we are the only, I would say, yard which can concurrently produce it in 2 places. We have a Kattupalli, we have Hazira.
Right.
And Hazira has enormous maturity in terms of what one can do on a submarine. So is the other facility which we operate for the government.
Right.
And that both we can leverage in Kattupalli and produce it.
So you're talking of parallel production lines?
We can do parallel production subject to absolute clarity that they can be bought.
Right.
Because we have had an experience with Ministry of Defence earlier that if we produce faster, the delivery may not be taken.
Right. Because the crewing of that
The
is
crew
an issue.
related
Right.
issues.
But do you believe that the way Project 75 India is structured, this will actually allow us to become truly Atmanirbhar in submarine design and construction?
To my mind, intent of 75 India is still on the TOT basis. So, original idea in terms of strategic partnership is that this technology comes in, and thereafter there were covenants which were leading to investments the government would have made into the company, and the company would be sort of made to do. With that, we were to get the full-fledged capability. Today,
Right.
as far as Larsen Toubro is concerned, we know one thing for sure, that what will come from Navantia primarily would be the design.
Right.
And that is also because the platform is ready.
Right.
Customizing that platform for India's requirement is certainly where it will be a joint work, and we will do substantial part because we can do entire detailed engineering.
Right. And will that allow you to make your own submarines and then possibly export it as well?
Incidentally, in case of Larsen Toubro, 2 years back we already have our own submarine design. And we started
The
this
Special
journey,
Forces
the Special
submarine.
Forces one.
Right.
And that's the one which is a smaller one. And why we started on a smaller one is for a simple reason. Someone like you who genuinely understands the subject, making a 2000-ton class submarine and the equipment for it is far easier than making it for a 500-600-ton class, because the equipment must get miniaturized.
Right. Of course, yes.
And if you design and build that class of submarine, or rather even design and qualify your design and get it certified, then of course you are taking the tougher task, and that task today is already behind us. We started the journey about 5 years back, and we created a design which was fully certified and got it through international agencies in terms of the certification, and we are now waiting for a launch customer for whom we will build it. Submarines are not something you can build and keep it ready for somebody to buy.
It's only
because
placed.
everybody looks
Yes,
for
you need an order
customization.
for that. And
So we have a basic design fully
Right.
ready. Scaling up that design in terms of, as I said, equipment making into larger form factor is always easier, and one should be able to do that full-fledged.
And what is the kind of support uh, a defense company like yours would need from the government of India? Because we well know that the arms business only works when the government starts doing the pushing and the pulling. What is the kind of support you would need from the government for pushing a project like this, where you've done an IDDM thing? There's no requirement. It doesn't seem to be a requirement as of now in India, but to push it
No,
abroad.
I'm quite clear that the next conventional submarine program will be defined under IDDM requirement, and that's a clarity that you have to be ready.
This would be the one following 75I, 76.
Yes, call it 76, call it 77, depending on how it happens, because we know the 6 conventional were converted to the strategic ones,
Yes.
nuclear powered
Right.
SSNs. So whatever be the final numbering, but that effort which is already going on in India by the Navy, and Navy obviously is as a partner in terms of how to take that forward.
Right.
And that in any case would be an IDDM submarine.
Right.
So the capability in terms of varieties of bits and pieces which already has come into existence today is being leveraged by the country. So one thing we can be sure, 75 India is the last program where we are buying a design.
Right. That's a very significant statement to say, and coming from somebody who's been part of some key defense programs for decades. But moving on to MSMEs, and as a prime contractor, when you're looking down the chain, how important for our self-sufficiency in defense are MSMEs? What would you expect the government to do for them in the next 5 years?
I'll tell you, typically someone like us who've been the prime contractors,
Yeah.
we have one absolute clarity that if I keep creating everything within the house, then I keep increasing my
Your costs. Right.
and my agility goes down. Now this is precisely where right from the time we got into formally the defense production, because earlier 15-20 years we are only doing the R&D partnerships with DRDO and with Navy, but 2004-5 onwards, when we really got in post licenses era and actual acquisition contracts being backed by us, we created multiple, again, domain specific complexes within Larsen Toubro. Now each of them on an average will have about 50% work that happens within and 50% work happens outside. So on an average, I would say that when we start talking of MSMEs, we truly take them as our partners, because lot of things which one always feel that if I do it, I'll do it better and I'll do it faster. But the fact remains, if you have 20 things to do and you have 2 people to do it, it's better that that work goes out. Even if individually, if one had to focus any one of those items, they could have done faster. But you simultaneously have 20 to be done, then best way to leverage through MSME. What happened in case of us is some of the earliest programs, this is what proved to be a right strategy. So we could control our costs, we could control our overheads into what goes into building the major platforms, and also that you do see that some of the MSMEs come out with some exceptional ideas in terms of innovation.
Right.
And you leverage that, because you're trying to build a full-fledged major platform. Now you do need people who have their own thoughts and their own ideas, and the more and more knowledge contribution they make, you in a way build a relationship, so that if you get a contract, the back-to-back that contract will go to the same person or the same industry who worked with us. Now today we see a huge amount of our dependence in that sense into a supply chain, and I think for good reason. And having done this, we know that next 40 years, when each of these platforms remain in service, there will be parts and components which will come from within India. While one can deal with the overall system level things and taking overall life cycle support costs, we will actually need those parts and components coming from industry. In case of Vajra, on a part list, on the first contract for 100 Vajras, we had 85% items physically produced in India. And I used to keep telling my requirement was to do by value 50%. But I ended up doing 85% by part count. So my life cycle cost now has no relationship to what I did in terms of cost, but in terms of my content. So life cycle content in case of supporting a full-fledged platform over next 30-40 years would be that low. And that's the power which an MSME brings in
And
to a
the
major player
ecosystem.
like us,
Yes.
as a whole ecosystem.
And finally, what are your expectations from the new government to take Atmanirbhar Bharat forward, assuming there is going to be an Atmanirbhar Bharat 3.0 in the third term of this government? What are your expectations from
I see
policy?
very clearly as 3.0, one, obviously more and more programs on the acquisition anvil. Second, far higher levels of pushing out in terms of our ability to export. Far more facilitation will start happening. Lots of issues which still are there in the DAP, despite so many of those business process restructuring related changes that have come in. 2020 DAP made a statement that it will be open for a review in 5 years' time. Because what used to happen every 2 years now will happen every 5 years. So a new DAP will be in the discussion soon, and the new government will take that forward. We expect the new DAP to be discussed, debated, finalized sometime in 25. Let's say mid-25 if it has to come in, 8-9 months of dialogue has to begin. Now this is where lots of issues which all of us see on the level playing, private sector, public sector. While public sector must continue and survive and grow, the growth rate that India requires is much, much higher in terms of defense requirements and to become Atmanirbhar, which PSU alone cannot fulfill. And that's exactly where the private sector comes in. So there has to be a level playing ground which is available to the private sector. Second aspect which I see very clearly, government will start now facilitating the public-private partnership in a big way, which has not happened in the past. Both public as well as private saw some amount of at each other as competitors. And to that extent, going forward, and we were the ones to show that way by actually signing off with GREC, who selected us for building 7 of their ships. Now, they had too many orders. We didn't have orders at that point in time. And given that, we decided to work together. Now, I'm sure this will gradually happen, with more and more shipyards. And that's where the work distribution in that sense. And that will bring in again the same issue that I talked about, giving work to others in terms of MSME. Now the costs will start coming down, overheads will start coming down, efficiencies start getting improved, delivery times will start becoming shorter. Now, besides that, I see this government to be clearly moving towards, call it clear-cut, embargoes in terms of where you will buy and what you will buy. There probably would be zones we will not want to buy. And I see very clearly that the friendly countries, the whole ecosystem, as we are expected to be exporting to those places, those relationships of not just selling to them, but giving them far higher in terms of capability will come on table. Because in a way, if you have a, call it a friendly nation dealing with the same enemy, you might as well empower him far more. It's like teach somebody fishing, why do you want to give him a meal?
Right, right, absolutely. Teach someone fishing, and that's Mr. Jayant Patil there talking about the landmark reforms that you could expect in the third term of the Modi government, Atmanirbhar 3.0. Thank you very much for your thoughts and your time.
Thank you, Sandeep.